Hello, BookTube, and hello, AuthorTube. Poor, neglected AuthorTube, Writer World, WriterTube, WriteTube, whatever we're going to call it. I started off an unofficial writing collective on this channel for February and March of 2024, and I have been writing up a storm. I carved out a space for my daily routine for the novel that I'm working on, The Trials of Esther. Uh, I carved out that space early on in February and have just been joyously returning to that space every day without fail. Some days I write twice as much as I thought I would. Some days I tend to write in one chapter installments, and sometimes I write two chapters just because it's really enjoyable to do. This story, I had a clear outline in my mind of what it was, of its general shapes and its characters. And right now, if you are also engaged in the Steve Donoghue Writing Collective, you are at the halfway point. Your story should be at the halfway point, which is an odd thing to do if you're writing fiction. I'm assuming most of you are writing fiction. And when you're writing fiction, the halfway point is odd. The human brain automatically expects that the halfway point will be some sort of crucial watershed. And yet, in most novels, that's not true. Most novels are freighted to the two-thirds point or later. That is when crucial things will happen, right up to the denouement and then the falling action at the end of the book, but not in the halfway point. The halfway point, the book will still be building. What can we say about that halfway point? I think I'm obeying all the unofficial rules. Of course, there are no rules for fiction. But if we were to make unofficial rules, I think one of them would be that your cast had better be assembled by the halfway point. You should not be adding characters, important characters, by then. Everyone should be present by then. That is certainly true for me. My cast was assembled in chapter 4 of my book. So I know these people now, and I'm giving myself the space and the latitude to help my readers to know these characters. And I would think that by the halfway point, which is where we are, I mean, it's March 5th, so I'm finishing The Trials of Esther. I'm planning to finish it by the end of March, in time for Camp NaNoWriMo in April. I know exactly what I'm writing for Camp NaNoWriMo in April. I know exactly what that is. Don't have the final details of it yet, but I know exactly what kind of thing I'm writing. But since I'm planning on wrapping this thing up at the end of the month, and so I don't want to end too far ahead of time and have that block that I've carved out of the day grow over with kudzu. And since I don't want to finish after that and be writing two things in April, I'm pretty much planning to bring it in down on the nose at the end of March. So I've got to take an inventory of what sorts of things in your writing in your project should be done by the halfway point. No? Do you think this way? I wonder if you look at a timetable. If we gave ourselves a timetable for the writing collective this time around, I'm letting the writing collective down here at the beginning of 2024, but I don't plan to continue letting it down. If we give ourselves some parameters for the writing collective, then that means that your project is at the halfway point. So do you do that kind of an assessment? I'm wondering now about this week. I'm wondering, is this where I want it to be? The halfway point is not when that great momentum feeling will kick in. That happens a little bit later. Halfway point, you're not exactly chugging up the hill still. If you've been working every day, then you have all of the components in place. You have all the people in place. You are building out the story. So you're not exactly crawling uphill anymore, but you're not slaloming downhill either. That feeling will come. I know exactly what it's going to feel like for The Trials of Esther. I can't wait. But I'm not there yet. You have to lay out your pieces. You have to carefully develop the game. You have to carefully figure out which moving pieces are connecting with other moving pieces and when. If you botch any of that now, then the slaloming to the end will be cheap, or it won't work. It won't happen. So I'm in that point now, where I am building my book has two main plot lines, and I'm building both of them steadily, piece by piece. The key here being that although it might in your own mind be a little tedious, to build steadily with foresight towards that downhill run that is the ultimate dopamine rush. You've got the dopamine rush in mind, so you might be thinking that the building periods in these chapters is a little on the tedious side. And okay, you're the writer. You get to think that. But you must under no circumstances allow your reader to feel tedium in those chapters. If anything, you have to bear down even harder on those stage setting, piece moving, chapters in order to make them more interesting. If anything, you have to make them more interesting to guard against the fact that you might leak out any tedium that you're feeling. That's kind of what I'm doing now. Not last night, but the night before last, I had a particular chapter that it just felt raw, and I'm pretty good usually. I'm an old trooper. I've got a million shticks. I'm pretty good usually at getting to a chapter like that and thinking, all right, well, you don't want to go into this chapter with it feeling like tooth extraction, or there's no way you'll be able to hide that feeling from your reader, and you must hide that feeling from your reader. So let's think. What are some ways that I can do this? I've done this a million times. What are some ways that I can add some life to this particular furniture moving chapter? And the other night, I had a hard time with it. Not usual for me. In my own defense, I'd done a lot of writing that day of other things, but I had a lot of trouble coming up with a way to do it. It can't be just a gimmick. For instance, by the halfway point, you will have your narrative viewpoints settled in your book. So when you get to those dry, furniture-moving chapters in the halfway point, you can't just suddenly have someone else's point of view edge their way in just because it makes things more interesting for you. It won't work that way. You've already set who's telling the story and who's not. So I couldn't do that. I figured out a way, but sometimes you don't figure out a way. Sometimes it just comes down to you making yourself do it. This is the work part of writing that so many people who don't know anything about writing think does not exist for writing. They think, oh, well, when I get a moment, when I'm free from the box factory, I'll finally be able to sit down and write that novel. Because it's just like falling out of bed. I just haven't had the leisure time to do it, as if writing a novel is a product of leisure. It isn't a product of leisure. It's a product of incredible amounts of work. And this is the real work for me. I think probably that emphasis might fall in different places for different people. Some people probably don't mind the furniture moving, but they really can't stand the research, the foregrounding ahead of time, or any of the interstitial elements like pacing or dialogue. Some people can't stand dialogue or whatnot. For me, this is the work, is getting to occasionally, it doesn't happen often. If you construct your story well, you won't have chapters like this very often, where that it feels like just like your keel is scraping the coral. And you just got to keep it afloat until you get to greener waters. You've just got to do that. That's the work that you're doing as a writer. Every once in a while, even the best constructed story, of course, none of my stories are the best constructed stories, but you know what I mean. Every once in a while, even a carefully constructed story that is meant to avoid scraping the keel will still do that. And then you've just got to muscle it over. You've just got to find a way to make that chapter interesting. It's not a question of amuse. It's not a question of anything supernatural. You still have access to your full vocabulary. You still have all the toolkit of tricks and practices of the trade that you've built up over writing. You know how to change up the pace of a story, how to change up the pace of a scene, to make it more entertaining, to make it a little bit faster reading. You might not be feeling it, but you know how to produce it on the page. Well, those are the dry moments when you are required to produce something on the page that you're not feeling. Those of us who are hacks and who have been doing hack work for a long, long time, the better part of a century, there's a lot of times when the job is that. The entire job is that. Is simply you saying, all right, well, this is an absolutely lifeless job, but I'm being paid to make it seem alive. And I want to be paid, so I will do that. And you do it. I don't know what. People who are still writing, especially writing fiction, under the delusion that it's all the product of the supernatural forces, that you have to be moved to do it. I don't know what they do when they get to chapters like this. Maybe they just don't write them. Maybe that's why so much contemporary fiction is so bad. It could be. Maybe they just get to these chapters and think, well, if I'm not feeling it, then I can't do it. It could very well be. Ask a contemporary writer to do writing. Not personal confession on the page, but actual writing. They can't do it. So maybe that's the case. Maybe those skills are, I'm talking about skills that are doomed. But they're not doomed for me. They're part of the kit for me. And I've hit a few of those chapters. I think I've probably got a couple more chapters like those to go before the downhill slalom feeling kicks in. But I wanted to do a check-in video with you all. Ask how your own writing project is going, if I dare ask that. How things are going. Are you writing anything for the Steve Donoghue Writing Collective? I'm not giving up on this idea. I've let it down for its first installment, and then we'll have Camp NaNoWriMo, which has its own infrastructure, so I don't have to even think. I don't know what the infrastructure with this thing would be, but with NaNoWriMo, the infrastructure is there already, so I don't have to think about that. And naturally, I'm experiencing a little bit of the grass is always greener, right? Because we're near the halfway point of your book. That's when those furniture moving scenes are going to occur, if they occur anywhere. You're going to be getting the furniture will be to torture the metaphor. The furniture will be delivered in those grinding, pure uphill battles chapters at the very beginning of your book. That's when your furniture is getting delivered and you and your friends are exhausting yourself moving it into the rooms. Then you've got the middle of the book where you're moving it around, inviting people in, starting to feel broken in and house warmed. And then the end. I'm not there yet. I know almost exactly when that feeling is going to start kicking in, and it's not yet. But I want to know about you. How are you doing for your writing project? If you are writing one, I'd love to know. Report your progress to me. It's been a very, very great paucity of Steve streams here. I know that. Sorry about that. I'll try to make up for it. But in the meantime, that's my writing update. The trial semester is going well. This is going to be a thing I'm going to like when I'm done with it. And I also think it has a second book in it, which is very rare for me. I think there might be a second book in it. But I don't know. The second book will certainly not be what I write for Camp NaNoWriMo. I know what I'm writing for Camp NaNoWriMo. But anyway, sing off. Let me know what you're thinking on the subject of writing, and I will wrap this up for now. But I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.